Next week in Tomorrow's World at Large, Kieran Prenderville goes in search of a certain sense of humour. That's next Wednesday at 8:30. Starting shortly on BBC2, Robin Ray presents the last of the heats of the movie quiz to find the film Buff of the Year. At 9:25 tonight on BBC1, there's part one of a two-part Chicago story in which patrolman Joe Gilland accidentally shoots an elderly woman and begins a chain of events which leads to an international crime ring. At 10:35, there's international athletics from Zurich, featuring athletes from Europe and America. Following the news headlines at 11:10, Sir Harold Wilson gives the second of 4 interviews in The 20th Century Remembered, and this week he describes the battles between the left and right wings of the Labour Party in the 1950s. So these are programmes for the latter part of the evening here on One. Now on BBC1, the 9 o'clock news with John Humphreys.
It looks like peace at last in Beirut. The Palestinian guerrillas should start leaving at the weekend. A frantic day on the world's money market. Shares leap and the pound gets stronger. The Seychelles mutiny seems to have been crushed. The hostages go free. Reunion for the British adventurers who spent 99 days on the ice. And Sebastian Coe is back on the track in style. Good evening. For the people living in Lebanon tonight, the prospect of real peace is now perhaps just 48 hours away. The Lebanese cabinet have approved the withdrawal plan for the evacuation of the 7,000 Palestinian guerrillas trapped by the Israeli forces in West Beirut. Tomorrow, the Israeli cabinet is expected to give its final approval. So, 73 days after the Israelis crossed Lebanon's border and some 11,000 deaths later, it looks as if the Americans have persuaded all parties to accept their plan for peace. It's a personal triumph for their special negotiator, Philip Habib, who's waged a long and arduous struggle. The withdrawal program is complicated. It involves an international force, including American, French and Italian troops, and it should begin on Saturday. Nicholas Witchell reports from Beirut on how it will work.
It's expected that the process will begin over the weekend. Initially, French troops will land here to secure the area around the port. As they do, the first of the PLO men will leave by ship to Cyprus, escorted by American and Italian warships. The evacuation is expected to last some 15 days. As it progresses, American and Italian troops will also move into Beirut to take up peacekeeping duties. Then it's planned, with more PLO men leaving Beirut by land to Syria, the Israelis will finally withdraw. As the PLO forces leave, American and Italian troops will move into Beirut to join the French along positions on the Green Line, which divides the two parts of the city. The Americans in the north near the sea, the French further south, and the Italians towards the airport. All the elements, the ships and the troops of the peacekeeping force, have been standing by for days. The United States carrier Forrestal and other vessels of the 6th Fleet are reportedly only 40 miles off the Lebanese coast. At Brindisi, the 550 men who will make up the Italian contingent of the force have been loading equipment aboard ship. Once they sail, it's expected to take them 4 days to get to Beirut. Then they'll help supervise the final phase of the evacuation, the removal by land to Syria of the last contingent of PLO men, and then finally the Israeli pullback.
The Lebanese cabinet meeting was delayed for 3 hours this morning while last-minute discussions went on between the American and Lebanese negotiators. It was then announced that all obstacles in the way of a peaceful solution had now been removed. John Simpson reports from East Beirut.
After 7 years of civil war and foreign intervention, the ministers who gathered at the presidential palace, a prudent distance from Beirut itself, knew they were coming to a meeting as important as any they'd held in those 7 years, even though at present they're powerless, ministers in name only. But the decision to invite the multinational force, although a foregone conclusion, allowed the last crucial section of the Habib plan to slot into place. 1,800 US Marines are on their way here by sea, and so the Italian and French contingents, to act as the buffer between the PLO and the Israelis. It all seems simple enough. But will the multinational force really be able to stop the violent settling of old scores, either during the withdrawal or after? And will it be able to cope with the anarchy that many people fear will break out in West Beirut if the extremist Palestinian groups refuse to go? The Lebanese Prime Minister has said our sorrows are coming to an end, but maybe it won't be as quick or as easy as that. To provide at least the appearance of handing their country back to them, Israeli tanks pull back from part of the front line to give way to the Lebanese army. It's a token, but the Lebanese government, which is as weak as its army, is in need even of tokens. The ceremony continued with an Israeli withdrawal from the Parliament building right on the front line, though they aren't exactly far away, 100 yards or so. The multinational force will only be the latest outsiders the Lebanese have pinned their hopes on. In 1976, they asked the Syrians and other Arabs in, and the Syrians are still here. But the Israelis are in an almost carefree mood, sensing the beginning of the end. It's the longest and most expensive campaign they've ever had to fight, and it's far from over yet, despite the air of relaxation. And even if the Syrians follow the PLO out of Lebanon and the Israeli army leaves, it'll be Israel that controls things here from a distance. Israel has made a lot of tactical mistakes in this campaign, but it isn't going to let Lebanon be used against it in the future.
While the Lebanese cabinet was meeting, a leader of one of the radical Palestinian groups was talking about the future for the Palestinian guerrillas. He called the evacuation a huge and significant turning point for the whole Palestinian movement. It's generally agreed that PLO leader Yasser Arafat now faces enormous problems. Our correspondent says there's been remarkable unity within the PLO throughout the weeks of siege in Beirut, but it'll take all the skills of his leadership to maintain that once his members are dispersed throughout the Arab world. And the organization won't have anything like the freedom of movement they've enjoyed so long in Lebanon. There's been a series of explosions during this evening in West Beirut. It's thought they were bombs being cleared by PLO men. Chris Drake reports.
The first explosion sent many people racing for cover, even though some reports suggested it was only a device which went off in a pile of burning rubbish. But then, minutes later, another explosion, this time much bigger but in the same area. That is, just off the city's main thoroughfare, Hamra Street. There was panic. The street's dark because the Israeli blockade means no electricity here. Debris was flung over a wide area and windows were smashed. Ambulances rushed to the scene, militiamen firing their guns into the air to clear a way through the crowds. And then yet another massive explosion, apparently in the same streets. And now we wait to discover just how many have been killed or wounded.
The worldwide boom in share prices went on unabated today in the belief that American interest rates are at last going to come down. Yesterday's record trading in New York was repeated from Tokyo across to London. The Financial Times share index closed 21 points up tonight at 579.2. At the same time, the dollar was under pressure everywhere. The pound gained 1.5 cents and now stands at $1.72. And as hopes rose of another cut in bank interest rates, the Secretary-General of the Building Societies, Richard Weir, said the mortgage rate could be down to single figures earlier next year rather than later. In New York today, the busy share trading is continuing, with a record 100 million shares sold in the first 4 hours. Our economics correspondent Mark Rogerson takes up the story as the London Stock Exchange opened this morning.
It was a fairly hectic start to trading, with dealers spurred on by hopes that interest rates are going to fall and companies will be able to make better profits in the future. The main share index added 22 points in the first half hour, one of the best performances ever, and government bonds did even better. As the day wore on, news came of advances on other European markets, France, Italy, Germany and Holland. The pound stayed firm on the foreign exchanges, and when sellers did appear in London, the shares were bought back again. But I asked the economist at stockbrokers Simon & Coates, does all this mean our economic problems are over?
Well, I don't think the very strong rise in the markets necessarily means that we're out of the economic woods as yet. Dr. Kaufman, the leading Wall Street analyst, has changed his mind on US interest rates. He now thinks they're going to fall, and that has caused a worldwide surge in share prices. But basically he thinks interest rates are going to drop because the US economy is so weak and still in recession that companies are not going to want to borrow to finance investment, which means he suspects America will stay weak and the UK will probably, under those circumstances, remain